Okay, let's go. Let's start. Laptops away.
Yeah, I heard it sucks.
All right, so grab a seat and all right, here we go. So I've been really looking forward to this class. It's kind of been in the planning for maybe a couple years in a way. I've been waiting until the opportunity to be able to do this particular class, but it's been in the past 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks that we realized, hey, it might be a possibility. And the title is "I'm a Bad Person." And later we'll explain the meaning of that title. But this class also goes back to my TED Talk on Iraq. And just like Bassem, who you met, contacted me after watching my TED Talk, many other people contacted me after watching the talk. And lots of people had different reasons for doing that. And one person who contacted me was this gentleman. And he said that somehow he stumbled upon the talk and he listened to it, and it really motivated him to reach out to me. And so we started a correspondence, and he sent me an article that he wrote called "A Soldier's Story." And students in this class for the past several semesters have been reading this story. And he sent me a link to his book, and I bought his book called "God Is Not Here." And when a soldier, including particularly someone who's had a lot of experience in deployments and who is elevated to the rank of lieutenant colonel, writes a book called "God Is Not Here," it makes me really curious to see what it is that they're seeing. And so, as it turns out, this gentleman, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Edmonds, is here visiting us today. And so I'm going to welcome him to Social 119. Sir, come on up.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Hey, before you start, I know that you're going to say something about, well, why did you reach out to me? What did you see in that talk?
Wow. I saw someone reflecting back who hadn't experienced war, someone reflect back my views that I developed when I was in Iraq. Seeing ourselves from someone else's perspective. And that's the experience that I was afforded in Iraq, was be able to, see all of, our strengths and weaknesses, our foibles and faults from their eyes, which is an eye-opener.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very cool. I appreciate it, and thanks for coming, because, you're coming all the way from Germany. And why are you here? Like, what's your reason for speaking, especially to a group of mostly college students?
I've honestly, the reason I'm here, we become wise not only by creating new knowledge. We become wise by remembering things that nearly every major religion, spiritual tradition, humanistic tradition has learned, and then which we've forgotten. over and over again in our lives. And, several years ago, life smacked me over the head. I lived my life, and now I'm 49. I learned that I was living unwisely. And if nothing else, that required for me to find death before death could find me. And what happened, it required a lot of motivation on my part. Because I was a particularly dense guy. And so, it required multiple combat deployments, life and death experiences, as well as many years of suffering. But what I would like, nothing better in the world than that you are able to find yourself, know who you truly are, without all of the kicking and screaming that I went through. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes.
Maybe I'll learn something also. Hey, so let's talk about you. So you are, we have some photos, so I put a slideshow together. Tell us, we're going to go through this part quite briefly. So who are these folks up here?
Well, as this class is, I'm one of, countless American archetypes. I'm a descendant of German, Swedes, and Native Americans who went west to become Oregon homesteaders. I'm older brother of a Oregon medicinal marijuana grower. I'm the brother of 2 Venezuelan sisters and 2 Mexican sisters who later became my adopted sisters. And the son of 2 beautiful people. After they graduated from UC Berkeley, they decided to go into the Peace Corps and not Vietnam War. And as I grew into adulthood, I was able to watch them dedicate their lives to serving disadvantaged children in inner city Los Angeles and then in a small rural agricultural town. And so, they were willing to leave the comforts of family and home to help out those who were more fortunate. However, I decided to do the same thing, however, with a rifle.
So you are one of those people that I often refer to as social workers with guns.
Yeah.
That's the way you chose. Because, I talk about soldiers. My experience in working with militaries is that most people who volunteer to be part of militaries do so out of desire to make the world a better place. Not to kill people, but actually to keep people from killing other people. So, and this is your nuclear family.
That's
I put both of these slides up here, by the way, because of his younger daughter. The faces. He had about 5 slides that he showed me, and every one they were funny.
Yeah, that's my family. When I got back from Iraq, I met my wife and focused my energies, locking away my memories from Iraq and focusing myself on creating a new life. My wife, Cheryl, who's an acupuncturist, and my 2 daughters, Ava and Natalie, who are now fluent German speakers going to German school.
Yeah. Because you're living in Germany at this point. And still in the military, by the way. And then, so this is you in your first deployment, right? You were young here? How old were you?
19.
In Desert Storm.
That was Desert Storm.
Yeah. Is this you right here?
Yes, that's me. If you were to ask my family where our discussion should begin, it's probably an unexpected life decision. When I was 17, as a junior in high school, I decided to join the military, and I went into the Army Rangers, and then Desert Storm in 1991. And I returned and went to college and got my first BA, and then in a commission as an Army second lieutenant in the infantry.
All right, and here, this is you in Iraq.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you in the middle. The handsome guy, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far.
I was thinking it could be that guy. All right. And this is you also in Iraq.
Yes.
Who is this young man?
That's the son of our interpreter. We had about 5 Iraqi interpreters, ranging from Iraqi Arabs to Iraqi Kurds to Syrian Kurds.
And that's it's a really cool photo.
And unfortunately, he couldn't go to school. It's too dangerous. So his father would bring him to the base, and he did odd jobs around the base.
And this is you with Iraqi soldiers.
Yes.
In the mess hall.
I lived on a little tiny Iraqi base in the center of Mosul, called the Guest House. It was formerly one of the retreats of Hussein, one of Saddam Hussein's sons. I lived with about 6 other Americans and about 400 Iraqis.
And I should say, so we're talking here about one deployment for you. You've been deployed many times.
Yeah.
Like how many times?
14.
14? Okay. And this is you out jogging in Iraq?
That's the base. So it was a tiny little base, maybe 500 meters long. That was about the first 3 months. After about the first 3 months there, I was shot at multiple times and just missed. So I decided it wasn't appropriate to.
Wait, people used to shoot you while you were running?
Yeah.
Dude,
You can see over the fence. So,
over your head?
Yeah.
Did you see the bullets?
I
hitting
saw the
you?
bullets hit.
Yeah.
So after that, I ran literally a 3-minute loop that was in the trees a little closer. You'll see the trees.
Yeah.
Next slide. Yeah. So.
All right. No, we won't. We took that one out. Okay, so let's talk breakdown. And by the way, just so you know where we're going here, this is let me just speak for a second, okay?
I've heard that's not very hard.
We're headed. This is a really, in many ways, you'll see as we move forward, a very difficult class, and I'm just bringing the energy into the room. We're going to go somewhere in this class that we don't often go. Okay, so we're going to talk breakdown, and we're going to talk about breakdown in Iraq before internal breakdown. So one thing that jumped out for me when I started reading that article, and I was telling Bill today that when he sent me his article and I started reading it, I read the first line and then I pulled myself away from my desk and I just kind of gathered myself. I looked down. I just had to really pull myself together because I said, this is going to really take me somewhere. And then I brought myself back to the computer and continued reading. And here was the first line. For just a minute or two, step into my life. I'm an American soldier in the Army Special Forces. I have just returned from a 1-year tour of duty in Iraq, where I lived, shared meals, slept and fought beside my Iraqi counterpart as we battled insurgents in the center of a 1,000-year-old city. I am a conflicted man. And I want you to read the story of that experience as I lived it. And I'll send the article out to class, but I have to say it was one of the most powerful things that I've ever read about war. And so let's talk about that experience. This is you. And who are these guys? What are you doing? What's happening here?
That's one of the many nightly raids that my job was to partner with an Iraqi intelligence officer, just one person, who had been interrogating insurgents for about 30 years, traitors, criminals, and terrorists. And it was my job to help him find information so that we could go out and capture insurgents. So this is one of the many patrols, or not patrols, but raids at nighttime that the Iraqis went on that I assisted with.
And you are in Mosul here?
Yes.
Very close to Bassem's house, actually.
Yeah, just about. I think it's about a half a mile.
Yeah. As best as I was able to ascertain. So what's so interesting is Bassem was standing right where you're standing, and here you are several weeks later, and the two of you were living about a kilometer apart. So here you've gone out, and when you talk about Iraqi insurgents, you're talking about insurgents who are killing mostly other Iraqis, but also attacking Americans.
Yeah. Yes.
Both. Yep.
Iraqis and Americans. Unfortunately, it was mostly Iraqis that got killed,
And
and
so
not Americans.
and these are some people that you picked up.
Well, not me.
Yeah.
I mean, the
The
Iraqis picked them up. My job was to help him interrogate, get information, go out, find, so that we can interrogate more. And it was a never-ending cycle. And when we would bring, they would bring people in. They would have, at the time, 2005. This was a very, well, it is still, but it was a very dangerous time, especially for Iraqis who were in the Iraqi military and were working with Americans. And so, and it was often that those that we captured were released for a variety of reasons. So the Iraqis were very worried about their faces being seen. So the sandbags were primarily for the safety of the Iraqis that were either in the missions or interrogated.
So this bag on that person's head is to keep them from being able to identify the other Iraqi soldiers who have brought them in, so that they don't then carry out acts of violence against them. So when we talk about Iraq breakdown in Iraq, I think as we talk about this, you and I were talking earlier. I think it's really important for people to understand that after we invaded and Saddam Hussein kicked out Saddam Hussein. Naturally, any society, it's not just Iraq, it would happen here in the United States. So here, let's just do like a mind thing really fast. Imagine what would happen here if suddenly you woke up in the morning and another country had invaded the United States and got rid of our entire central government. The presidency and Congress, everything was up in the air. We didn't know who was in charge. Is the legislative branch in charge? Who's making decisions? What about the police, FBI, anything? I mean, it's all just up in the air. And so the whole government just sort of falls apart. And so what happened at this point in time is that, and tell me if I get it right and you add to it. One thing that we did was we broke down. Gosh, the verb is we dismantled the Iraqi military. So all these people who are in the military and all these guns suddenly have nowhere to go. They have no jobs, and the guns are in the streets, and everybody has the streets. And we, the Americans, make a decision to dismantle the military. And now there's total chaos.
I mean, but also you have to understand that this is not a value judgment. This is just what happened. When we make the decision to disband all of the Iraqi security forces, most of the leaders in that time were Baathists. They were of a party that was beholden to Saddam Hussein. And they depended on their positions for their welfare in life. And then all of a sudden, within a second, it was all gone. And so that became one of the many backbones of an insurgency that would arise, about a year and a half after our initial invasion of Iraq.
So there's nothing unique about Iraqis being particularly violent, particularly crazy, particularly this. It's going to be the same in any society. But you were there at this particular time when things really fell apart. This insurgency emerged. People who were really angry.
Yes.
The Iraqis angry at the Americans, angry at.
I mean, there wasn't a single stereotype. Just like any city in America and the violence there, you're going to have 1,000 different motivations for wanting to fight. All the way from those who just use the chaos, the anarchy, because for personal reasons, power and greed, to those who are very moral and just learned over time to hate Americans, all the way to those who subverted Islam.
So this is where you were. This is right in here, right? Is the prison?
That's the guest house. Just to the left is where I ran in the trees. But right to the left of that pickup truck in the basement is where the prison was. It's mostly dark, mildew on the walls, cold. It held about six people, but often there was a lot more than just six. And
you were 1 year working out of that basement prison.
Yeah, One, literally, I mean, the base was, probably 300 meters by 200 meters. It was just a very small, tiny little base right in the center, and surrounded, by destroyed buildings on one side and the Tigris River on the other side. And so my life consisted of a triangle between the prison, where I slept, was about, literally where this picture is taken is on the roof of where I slept, and then the place where we ate food with the Iraqis, which was about 100 feet to the left there. So that was life. That and patrols.
And this gentleman?
Yeah, that's Sadie, which is Arabic for sir. That's Sadie. He was my partner in life for 1 year.
And he's this Iraqi.
He's the Iraqi colonel. That my job was to advise and assist in his interrogations with his prisoners. However, that was my job responsibility. My moral responsibility was to try to deter him from resorting to torture and to abide by the Geneva Conventions.
So what happens is, so the Iraqi military, they go out on patrol. They hear about people who are part of the insurgency, and they get tips, either from other insurgents that they brought in or somebody out in the street. They hear about it. They go out at night. They bring people in who they need to question because they need to stop it. People are getting killed. I mean, innocent people are being killed all over the city. And so the goal is to stop the killing. And they go out at night searching for people, bringing people in, and now you got to interrogate them because you don't know if they're innocent or guilty or what they know or who the ringleader is. Or am I getting it?
Yeah, pretty much. That was a job.
And what's happening here?
That's when they first bring prisoners off the streets. It's kind of like triage, where you first sit down, and then this is a guard. On the left is a guard talking to the prisoner, just to get some of the basic information, your name, where you live, how old are you, that kind of things.
Okay. And who's this guy here?
At the time in Iraq, and especially in Mosul, there was a lot of fissures that were opened up in society because of the invasion. And they're, like any city, people use that chaos for their own benefit. But the rationale for becoming an insurgent was extremely varied. But rarely, and I think this is probably the only one or two people that did it because they believed, but the religion required them to do it. Most everyone there was an insurgent for a variety of reasons, primarily not religious reasons. They used religion as a tool to take advantage of the base angers in society, whether that be people that became angry because of our strategies, our policies, our tactics on the ground, our one-on-one personal interactions with the Iraqi. We're creating more insurgents than we could ever capture or kill.
Or because of us killing civilians.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Right? Yeah. Got you. Yeah. Because of the tactics of say the Americans or mostly Americans.
That's I guess what happens when you live in a self-contained, isolated bubble of American society, and then everyone on the other side of the fence is conceptually believed as the enemy.
Yeah.
And so you go out there thinking that you're going into dangerous, where everyone is a hostile. And then if that is what you believe, that is what you create.
Yeah. So this is one. So you're there hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of breaking down, talking to prisoners, and one or two people who actually wove Islam, their faith into there. So who's this guy?
Every once in a while, my counterpart, the Iraqi colonel, would come across someone who he thought was an insurgent for the morally right reasons, that he truly believed that he was doing the right thing for the right reasons, that he was a moral person that just hated Americans. And every once in a while, we would get someone like that. And he would ask me to sit down and interact with that person on a one-on-one basis, so that we could, put that. It's very hard to hate someone when you not only see them, but you talk with them and interact with them. And so that's an example of in time, we became friends.
And so you're really, and he spoke English well.
Yeah, he was educated, went University of Mosul.
So this is a guy who
in
was
2003, he was working on the American bases to install IT equipment for the Americans.
But from what he saw,
and for what he saw over time, he just became angry, and he wanted to fight back.
I think one of the things that I often say, because people, if you're not studying, right? So we're connected in this way. I mean, for me, the U.S. military does really amazingly, really awesome things. I mean, we do some great things and we do some not great things, and there's always unintended consequence of actions. And one is that civilians die and people get hurt. And when you see that happening, think about Bassem. Bassem easily could have turned to hate, and Bassem worked through it, and he didn't turn toward hate. But we all know his story, and and if he had turned toward hate, how many of us would say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be hateful"? Come on, most of us would be. That's the question that Americans have for Bassem. How do you not hate? And so you could ask the same thing for this gentleman here. How do you not hate? Different reasons, but still. So now we're gonna walk into some of the complexity of your work. It's not just interviewing people. It's not just understanding them. It is immensely complex. And the breakdown of Iraqi society then, because of what's happening in your role, begins a process of breakdown inside of you. Yeah. So what is happening here? Who are these two people?
Over time, all of the interrogations, reality became condensed. It became like a thick soup that just poured down my mouth. And over time, every name became a face, and every face, whether that face be an angel or devil, seemed to condemn me to moral failure, because almost every decision resulted in the opposite of every best intention. And that's what happens when you are literally, live and work in the crucible of human existence. And it didn't matter the choice you made. We got information about a young girl that was kidnapped and to make made a sex slave. But we got the information too late, and so we went out to find her. And unfortunately, she wasn't there. So we captured a father, his brother, and that father's son, and we pitted this family together. And the father would yell at the son, no, it's not me, you're the one who killed her, you're the one who shot her with 2 rounds to the back of the head. And the son would scream back at the uncle, no, you're the one who had sex with her. And the uncle would scream back to the son, no, you're the one who threw her in the river. We found her body a few days later in the reeds of the Tigris River. Her name was Aisha, and she was 12 years old.
And this is important because
Well, in this case, it was my job was, I said, I felt responsible at this time because we got the information too late, and the Iraqis wanted to use harsher techniques on the prisoners, because I couldn't give orders, my job was to use persuasion, and often that persuasion would sometimes work, and sometimes it wouldn't work.
And you chose the persuasion tactic.
Yes.
Time passes by.
Time passes by, and no matter what happens, War is a moral minefield. Every single step, every single choice you make can feel like you're dying a little death, because it's not where a moral decision doesn't necessarily result in a catastrophic event. There you can see the consequences, you can smell the consequence, you can touch, taste, and even feel the consequences of your decisions that happen in the future.
So every decision that you're making, if you slow down because you're trying to follow you follow your own conscience, and then the result of you following your conscience, which is what most everybody, say Americans would say, the average Americans would follow your conscience, and then the result of that is a bad outcome. And then if you follow your bad instincts, then the result is a bad outcome. It's so go to.
One of the prisoners I convinced the Iraqis not to release went out, and this is Master Sergeant Anthony Yost. Anthony was killed in a house that was booby-trapped by a prisoner that I convinced the Iraqis to not torture and to release. Tony is survived by his wife and 3 children. Yeah.
So you said that quickly, and I don't want to keep you in the space, but because it's important that people understand, when we send soldiers off to war, when we send people off to war, it's not just sending them off to war, we're sending them off to be transformed, and sometimes transformed in really very painful and difficult ways. So what you said was, so you convinced, they brought some insurgent in, they brought somebody in, you convinced the
Iraqis
to let them go.
To let them go, and not to torture him, because that insurgent refused to talk, and Anthony went into a house that was unfortunately booby-trapped by that insurgent, and the house collapsed down on top of him.
And so part of war, which is what we're moving into, is this conversation of part of the casualties of war are all of the conflicted feelings and realities that soldiers bring home with them that result from from them trying to make the best possible decision that they can make that leads to terrible outcomes. And so he is one terrible outcome. And this gentleman.
I don't remember his name. What I do remember was that he was one of the insurgents that we captured, and I again convinced the Iraqis to release him. 3 months later, he was captured again and brought back to the prison where I lived and worked. And with him, we found out that he had gone on after I released him to execute 10 Iraqi civilians. He described it, either shooting them in the bullet with the back of the head or sawing their head off with a knife. And I watched the videotapes of him doing that.
You watched the video, so he's...
Well, yes. And I asked him, who were these people that you executed? And he said essentially, I don't know their names. I was paid $50 for each victim.
And did you watch the tapes because you just you felt obligated to watch them?
I mean, it's an obligation. One, it's our job to try to figure out. It's information, and we had to figure out who he was, who these people were. It could give us information about other insurgents, other terrorists. Yeah.
I'm just holding this space for a second. So you're carrying, that's part of what now you're carrying with you. So the weight of that, so we send you off to war. You enlist voluntarily to say, hey, I'm going to serve my country. I'm going to do the best. My parents are essentially social workers. They joined the Peace Corps. They're doing all these amazing things. They're very religious, very lovely people. You're saying, I'm going to be a social worker, but I'm going to do it with a gun because I want to protect other people. You get put into this job. You're making the best possible decision that you can, trying to figure out to follow the Geneva Conventions on the conduct of war, and now you're sitting with the weight of so much suffering, right? It's not something that we think about when we think about war.
No, but then I learned over time. I learned that most of the prisoners were actually innocent. That most of them had been just caught up in the net that the Iraqis used to catch sharks, and also to get information. I asked my partner, if he could explain this, and he essentially said that if the person is guilty, all right, or if the information comes from a guilty person, then the suffering is both necessary and fortunate. If the information comes from an innocent person, the information the suffering is unfortunate, but necessary. This man, he confessed to things that he didn't do. And I remember the Iraqi interrogator asking him, why did you confess? And he said, essentially, sir, your slaps were so hard that I thought if this was your slap, what happens when you use a cable? Yeah.
And your job this whole time is to try to, knowing that these interrogations have to happen, they have to occur. Otherwise, you're not going to get any information. And you got to try to make it happen in a way that's humane, legal, and yet they get the information that they need to get. And you're not doing the interrogations.
No,
I
I was purely advisor.
Yeah.
I would often sit in the back with a mask over my own head.
So you're just in this impossible. So this photo up here, right? So I wanted to use this photo because this is one that when you were in Iraq, a buddy of yours took this?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we're talking, you understand, when we're talking about civilians being harmed, because we were only showing men, but we're talking about people. Look at this beautiful girl, right? This is the harm. So your job is to help ensure, to stop the harm that's coming to average Iraqis. You know what I mean? And I hold her because she would be a person who could come to harm. So if I'm in your shoes, if I'm doing what you're doing, I'm holding her face in my mind's eye. Also, I'm trying to protect her. I'm trying to protect lots of people, but I'm also trying to protect her.
Yes, you're correct. I mean, it's hard to say. There was lots of good that happened. But what has the most impact are the bad things that happened. And one of the most bad things, at least from many soldiers' perspective, is the death of women and children. And when you go to war, you believe yourself to be capable of stopping that. And in war, you realize that isn't possible. War will always throw you a curveball, and people will die, and you will hold yourself responsible.
So that line that you just said right there, and you will hold yourself responsible, actually takes us right here. So this is something that you have been writing about. Your most recent article from just several months ago was particularly powerful, a moral injury. Can you just say a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's not me. Moral injury is a growing understanding that life has impacts on people. Right now, there is only one current diagnosis for the psychological trauma of war, and that's PTSD. Now, PTSD is a fear-related trauma. You have to have experienced some overwhelming fear for your life to be considered for a diagnosis of PTSD. However, in war, all right, humans, one of the things that we do, all right, from birth to death is we derive meaning from things, external situations, whether that be a wife, a husband, a partner, okay, your children, a job, a family, your car, the way you look, your body, your position of power or respect. One of the other sources of meaning that you derive that give you order in life is your morality, the codes, values, and ideals that you are grown up with and nurtured over the course of your lifetime. And no matter how moral of a person you are, all right, when you ask a moral person to go to war, the world, other people, or even yourself will violate that moral code. It's inevitable. And one of the signature wounds of war is being considered is something called moral injury. Yes.
So I think I think in one of your writings you called it the signature wound.
Well, it wasn't.
Of this generation.
That was a quote. I believe that quote came from a Pulitzer Prize winner author called David Wood, named David Wood. Yeah.
So you yeah, look, I mean the thing, Bill, the thing that so strikes me as I've gotten to know you is, and as I understand more about your family and your parents, is the essential goodness that is within you, right? And I don't know you that well, but I've read now much of your writing. I've had many conversations with you, and just the essential goodness. And so I imagine myself, I feel like I'm a moral and ethical being. And I imagine myself sitting, in that basement prison, knowing what has to happen here in order to protect life. And not just my life, right? Because I'm kind of on the base protected, but the lives of innocent people. And for whatever effed up reason, things got to be this way, right? So we can blame it on lots of decisions on the Americans, which in my TED Talk, for me, it's all about oil. If Iraq didn't have oil, we wouldn't have gone in, and we wouldn't have made the decisions to destroy a society so things would break down. And this wouldn't have happened, and you wouldn't have been there, and people wouldn't be getting killed, and it would be a very different situation. But now here I am, this person who joins the military in this way that I'm going to try to make the world a better place, and I'm stuck in these trying to make decisions between a terrible decision and a more terrible one. And whatever one I make, bad things are going to happen. And now this is weighing on me. Mm-hmm. This is sitting.
Well, I want to make sure I'm absolutely clear. Yeah. When he says, a terrible decision to a terrible, everyone's thinking, torture or not torture. And, what I learned over a year is that torture doesn't work. All right. Not only is it morally reprehensible, it's not effective, and that when you torture, what you're really doing is unconsciously or consciously pissed off, and other than the aberrant people who do it for fun, it's emotional gratification. And it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'm thinking this idea between, hey, I think this guy might be innocent, so we should let him go, but he might be guilty, and we should hang on. And it's like nothing you do, you're going to get it right, you're going to get it wrong. It's just, it's really unimaginable.
Well, I guess one of the important lessons I learned is that, the future doesn't happen in the future. The future happens in the moment, and the future that you experience reflects back your inner state of being. And so, if you make a immoral decision, the chances are you're going to have an immoral consequence.
Yo,
So, the whole end versus mean thing,
Yeah.
that is the justification for every atrocity, every dogma in society over 5,600 years can almost be attributed back to absolute certainty that the future holds some utopian state, environment, and it's better than now. And anything now I do is justified to accomplish that future. But the future will never come.
Even if I go kill all of these people to make that future that's going to be great, it's never going to come because the path I've taken to do that. So this is your grandfather, you and your grandfather.
Yeah, that's my grandfather, Maurice Russell. And we bring him, this was my commissioning as a second lieutenant. My grandfather was a amphibious landing craft captain in the Pacific campaign in World War II. And he came back from World War II in that campaign a completely different person. But he never, not once, do I remember my grandfather talking about his experiences in war. And then he was dying, and on bed, and I sat down next to him and held his hand, and the doctors had given him morphine. And in the delirium morphine, he started to cry and asked for forgiveness for all of the young boys that he thought that he was responsible for killing, because he was the person who brought them onto the beach and opened the gates. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, he was the captain of that landing craft. And thousands of young Americans were killed. And he held that inside, for his entire life. And it wasn't until his last, literally 10 seconds, 15 seconds, that came out. And he asked for forgiveness. Imagine, how important it would have been for him to have asked for forgiveness 40 years earlier, and how that would have affected not only him, but all the people that he interacted with day in and day out of life. Forgiveness is not something you give someone else. Forgiveness is a state of being, okay? All right? It helps you, and by helping yourself, you help everyone else. It's when you don't attach, you let go of the past, all right? Unforgiveness is inability to let go of the past.
So let's... So this is the title of the lecture. Tell us briefly about
This is Noah Pierce. Noah Pierce is former Army sergeant, and Noah in Iraq, amongst a variety of things, Noah ran over an Iraqi child with his Bradley fighting vehicle.
It was an accident.
Yes, it was an accident. But he held on to this and probably many other things for years and years and years. And one of the things that I've learned is that a memory that you can't embrace, all right, is the memory that you can't process. And the memory that you can't process is the memory that you can't transform. And what you can't transform will haunt you for life. And that is something that happens primarily when you do something that, the world, other people, or yourself do something that violates your strict, code of morality. Whether that, the world suddenly becomes a place, the world is, no longer meaningful. Other people are no longer benevolent, and most destructively, you are no longer a worthy person. And the meaning that you once derived from morality, I'm talking in figurative language, and understand the language reflects a brain structure, all right? That gives order in your life. All of a sudden, that order, that source of meaning that you derive from morality is vanished, all right? And in that place, it's a vacuum. And all of a sudden, psychologically, unconsciously, you strive to find some other source of meaning. Unfortunately, most often when you suffer some tragic event like this, you grasp on to negative meanings. You find responsibility for what has already happened. And so you draw a little circle, conceptual circle around yourself, and you say, the world, all right, I am angry at the world, I'm angry at other people, and then you turn that rage inward. And rage turned inward is shame.
And that's what happened to you.
Well, and that's what happened, I believe to know, and that's what happens to lots of people, not only in war, but I mean, war is just, it's life condensed into a very small space, time and environment.
So we have, okay, so when people might have the sense that after this one particular year in Iraq, I mean, this is just one of different deployments, but after this 1 year, you didn't just get here. You spiraled and struggled, and it's but for the grace of something that you're actually standing here, that you continued to move forward. And when I came back from Iraq, there was no visible wounds, but something had changed inside. But like I said before, I locked those memories away, and I focused my energies on creating a new life, a new job, getting married, and trying to start a family. But over 5 years, I realized that I was still living inside of that basement prison, and every single second of every single day, those memories would rise like a phoenix, and blossom into blistering consciousness, and then fall down the dust, and then rise once again. Essentially over time, it became exhausting to live, the memories are still very vivid, almost immersive virtual reality. I can still picture the smells and sights of, driving in the car and seeing a tight corner approaching and maintaining my speed, and with my hands locked on the 10 and 2, and imagining myself going through the rails, and imagining, the feeling of being free of yourself. It's not that you want to die. It's that living has become so painful that it seems preferable. And being free, in your case also, what you said, of the shame.
Yeah.
And
shame is very different from guilt. This is a whole niche. And so guilt is about something you do. It's an action. Guilt allows for redemption and allows for absolution. Guilt motivates you to make amends for some action. Shame is about who you are as a person. It makes you want to, crawl into the floor and disappear because everyone else can feel how unworthy you are.
And by the way, thanks for that. That's a really valuable distinction, because I know that's a feeling that many, many people have. These are the last 5 words in his journal before he took his life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, and the last 3 words were, "I am free."
I am free.
Yeah.
And this is part...
His suicide letter.
The thing that's so powerful, the first time that you Skyped into the class, I called the class More Than Thanks, because people talk about how much it's civilians, how much they appreciate the military, and we sing the national anthem, and we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and we thank our troops, and we thank you for serving, and it's like, but why, if we appreciate people in the military so much, why among returning veterans is the suicide rate so high? Is the self-harm rate so high? Because why is that? And so for me, the importance of you speaking and your message is to help people to understand all over the world, war creates trauma and war creates pain. Even when people are trying to do the best possible thing, it doesn't matter. The wounds, most of the wounds from war cannot be seen. And just the wounds from Noah Pierce, who would lead him to write, I am a bad person and I am free, before he takes his life. I mean, I want to, just one final piece here, that I want to read this quote, and then so you put this in one of your writings. Again, kind of coming from what I just said about how sort of easily we talk about war and going to war, and we play war games, and we have, video games, and we watch movies, and it's just like this thing that we don't often have an opportunity to reflect on what it really is and what it really means. And so Brian Turner was in the U.S. Army, and he wrote, it should make you shake and sweat, nightmare you, strand you in a desert of irrevocable desolation. The consequences seared into the vein. No matter what adrenaline feeds the muscle, its courage. No matter what God shines down on you. No matter what crackling pain and anger you carry in your fists, my friend, it should break your heart to kill. And how easily we don't take those words into account. And then we put it upon, in the United States anyway, people like you who say, I will volunteer to take that bitter pill, and then maybe have to take on this invisible pain that nobody else is going to see, but I'm going to deal with. I know I want to make sure we have an opportunity to say something about separation, because you have a really important story. And can you say, so you were flying over Africa.
Well, I was, I talked before about, that downward spiral of just not wanting to live in your own skin. Then something unexpected happened. And in 2014, I found myself in Central Africa as part of one of the U.S. operations to assist Africans in trying to capture and kill Joseph Kony and stop his LRA, Lord's Resistance Army. I'm not sure if you guys remember Joseph Kony, or Kony 2012. Kony is a Christian Messiah. He believed that he was the chosen of Jesus, and that he talked to God. And from 1986 until 2016, his band roamed Central Africa and killed almost 100,000 Africans and abducted about 60,000 kids to make them either child soldiers or sex slaves. And I was there. I found myself one day coming back from a tiny little a South Sudanese military outpost that was carved out from the jungles of South Sudan. And I was in this tiny little airplane. And the sound.
This plane.
Yes.
Yeah, this plane.
The sound is loud. You can't really hear it, can you? No. The sound is loud. It's soothing. But suddenly, the propeller stopped turning. And it won't stop. You can stop the video. But and I fell back into my seats. And I remember, looking out the other small little window and counting, up to 13. And at 13, I remember that propeller stopped turning as well. And I fell back into my seat. And I realized suddenly that the engines weren't working and that we were going to crash. And I looked out the tiny little window, that's, a cheek into the window, and all you could see was a sea of green, of triple canopy forests. And I remember, falling back into my seat and realizing that death was not only certain, it was imminent. And
this is a photo you took on that flight.
Yes.
So this is the canopy of the jungle.
And that you might not realize it, But when you are facing death and death is imminent, and you have prescience of that, your brain takes over your body, or your intelligence, your body's intelligence takes over from your brain. It stops your mind from its normal activity of being in a past or in a future, and it focuses you down to only the present moment, so that you can focus on surviving some dangerous situation. Unfortunately, in this case, I found myself in a situation that you couldn't do anything about. Not only could I not do it, but I couldn't even escape into a projected future that was somehow better. And at that moment, when you have time to contemplate and there's nothing to do, what happens is your mind focuses on the things that matter most in your life, the meaning that you derive from life. And what happened to me in this situation is my world focused down to a single point of light. And that light was my wife and my 2 children, and how the knowledge was I wasn't worried about my death. What happens is you focus on what your death means. And for me, my death meant when I hit the top of those trees that my family would be dying with me. And that knowledge instantaneously went to every one of the 40 trillion cells that compose this consciousness and blossomed, but tremendously unexpected. Instead of agony, I sensed that pure peace, a vibrant aliveness, okay, and an easiness that I had never experienced more. But even more profoundly than that, what happened was, I could literally sense the leaves on the trees below me, the animals that were in the forest, the seat back to my front, the 3 other passengers that were in the plane with me. I could even feel, all right, the 2 pilots that were screaming crash landing, all right. I realized that, I'd felt this before in the past. The times when sniper bullets missed me, the times when mortar rounds or rocket rounds just missed, or the times when suicide bombers or IEDs on the side of the road, bombs on the side of the road just missed, or the hundreds of patrols that I'd been on. I'd realized that in those moments, I felt alive for the only time in my life. But I allowed those moments of unexplained contentment and satisfaction to leave me unexamined and unexplained, and therefore quickly forgotten. However, in that tree, I learned, all right, I learned that literally we are energy. You and we are energy beings. We are literally connected to each other, all right? And we are connected to every other living and non-living thing in the world. And normally we go through life unable to feel that connectedness. And that's primarily because of how active our minds are throughout life. You may not realize it, all right, how active your mind is. But it is constantly thinking about the past, the future, and in the moment, if it is doing anything, it's judging the moment, either good or bad. All right, and unfortunately, it's often bad judgment. All right, but in that plane, what happened to me, all right, was, the intelligence that runs this body took over, and in the past, I realized that I had resisted life. All right. Somehow, for some reason, I unconsciously believed that, I was going to make life my enemy. And every punch I threw, somehow I believed unconsciously that it was going to change what had already happened. It was going to bring back the people that had died from my decisions or indecisions. All right? But in fact, every punch that I threw at life, that punch came back and hit me. All right, with greater intensity. And I learned that, all the suffering that I believed was coming from out there and into here was in fact coming from here onto myself. But in that plane, my body intelligence took over and said, you know what, we're going to try something different. Instead of resisting life, all right, we're going to surrender absolutely and unconditionally. And that's not surrender as in, I'm gonna, yeah, it's great. It's a good thing that we're going to crash into trees. That's a surrender to not judge internally what is happening. And when I chose unconsciously to surrender, I discovered, all right, how, in fact, underneath the obscuration of your mind, we truly are not only connected, but that connectedness feels amazing, all right? It's not a feeling that you derive from outside. It's a feeling that you are right now. It's who you truly are. Yeah.
But you didn't die.
No. At the very last second, unbeknownst to us, the pilots had found a tiny little road.
A road, not an airstrip.
No, just a little tiny road. And at the last moment, I remember looking out the window and seeing the leaves go by and thinking that this was the end, and then closing my eyes. And instead, we smacked into a road and jumped over another truck, a vehicle on the road, slammed on our brakes. The airplanes, slammed forward. And at that moment in life is the moment that, I have begun a journey of backing through a side door into consciousness, a journey that I'm still on today and that I'll always will be on, because the destination is not forgetting, all right? The destination is not forgetting who we truly are. Now you say, what's the big deal about this separation, and how when we feel separated, all right, when we feel that we're an isolated individual, what that impact is on our life. And it's truly unfathomable and unspeakable.
So I want to hear some final words from you. So, this is a sociology class on race and ethnic relations, and I'm always trying to find ways to build bridges and build borders. And when I look at this meme that came into my inbox, or came maybe on my Facebook page or something, that was probably made by the Russians, a couple of years ago. And, and I think about this quote by the chief of staff of the NSC. And I don't want to be political, but this is just perfect, because a lot of people think this about Muslims. And so you're a guy who, hang on, I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure that I get all the pieces. You went the furthest. You went as far into enemy territory as a person could go, as any American could go. The stakes are the highest for you and others around you. The danger is most real in your interaction with people in the Muslim world, or just in another culture, but in this particular case. You're there 24/7. It's unfamiliar territory. If there's anybody that should walk away with ideas, at least like this, or at least fear, or at least having negative things to say, it would be you. But you came away with this ideology of connection, that we're all connected. And you don't hate. And you don't fear. And how? What I want you to do is, this is my message all semester to this class and to these students. But this is me. I'm a knucklehead sociologist. You're a person who has every reason to not be connected. So I want you to stand right here in the center of the room. And I want you to tell this class what it is that you have seen that would lead you to say, I'm not taking that path, that we're connected.
Well, it's not that I look at that and say I'm not going to take that path. I mean, when I went to Iraq, it was I joined Special Forces when literally September of 2001. That month is when I went and began my very first assignment. And I went to Iraq not hating, but greatly disliking Muslims.
And by the way, we have 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yep.
And you know, I came back, but let's go back to I think the message that, you know, I if anything, I like, you know, when you feel, all right, not only feel separated, when you feel disconnected from every other thing, all right, to maintain that illusion of separation, you need not only others, you need people to be more than other. And what is greater than more other than an enemy? Okay? You need enemies in life to maintain that illusion of separation. And you know, why is separation so horrible? All right? I mean, literally, conceptually, you can draw a circle around your legs. All right? And those who are inside of that circle, all right, you give the full measure of your empathy and compassion to. You can step into their lives, all right, and you can reproduce what you believe they are thinking and feeling in yourself. And not only that, you are able to have a deep inner need to respond to alleviate that suffering, all right? However, all right, if you're outside of that conceptual circle, all right, unfortunately, your empathy and compassion can be lessened, just like a dimmer switch. All right, it can be lessened, but not only lessened, applied with bias. Okay, and if you went back 5,600 years, you could literally hop, skip, and jump across, you know, the human misery and atrocity all the way to the present day, where we are living in a time where you can see the effects of the subconscious belief in separation, when entire nations, our entire nation, is led by a island of one. Okay? Not only that, you can see the exact paradox and simultaneous opposite of that, when the entire human species is incapable of embracing the planet with empathy and compassion. So, you know, if there's anything I want to convey, is to know, all right, what Buddhists have always known and what physicists now literally confirm, all right? No one can exist in isolation. It's not possible, all right? And if you feel separated, if you don't know you're connected, all right, it's an illusion, all right? You are energy beings.
Including with people on the other side of the world.
Yes.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Hey, just so you know, Bill is around tomorrow. If anyone would like to sit down with him and have a chat, just come down to the front and we'll set up a time. All right?